Brennan Cole had spent 15 years building a reputation on integrity, first as a decorated homicide detective in Cleveland, then as a partner in a private investigation firm. Hannah was the last person he'd have suspected of betrayal, a successful corporate attorney with a pristine reputation, and he'd thought a deep commitment to their family. Yet when he uncovered his wife Hannah's affair with Daniel Travers, a charismatic late-night radio host, he abandoned every rule he'd ever lived by. There were no cinematic showdowns, no hired hackers, no rash confrontations, only a lean, lethal plan born of patience, patience he'd learned from countless midnight stakeouts. The first hint of Hannah's betrayal wasn't a lipstick-stained collar or an incriminating text message. It was something far more subtle. The way she began slipping into their home through the side door on Wednesday nights. Always the side door. Always at exactly 11:07 p.m. Brennan noticed it by chance one rainy evening. He had returned late from a client consultation and found the house unusually dark and silent. Their cozy craftsman-style home, usually aglow with warm light and life at that hour, felt cold and unfamiliar. The front porch light, which Hannah normally kept on for him, was off. Her car was in the driveway, but she wasn't curled up in the living room with a book as she often would be. Confused, Brennan made his way inside, rainwater dripping from his coat. The living room was empty, the kitchen spotless and cold. He flicked on a lamp and happened to glance at the digital clock on the stove. 11:05 p.m. 2 minutes later, he heard the faint creak of the side gate, followed by the soft click of a key in the lock. He stepped back into the shadows of the hallway just as the side door, the narrow door that led from the garage to the kitchen, swung open. In slipped Hannah, her silhouette briefly framed by the drizzle outside before she shut the door gently behind her. She hadn't seen him. Brennan watched from the darkness as Hannah removed her shoes by the mat, lining them up carefully as if she'd left them there hours ago. She hung her damp trench coat on its peg and tiptoed upstairs without turning on a single light. Brennan's heart thudded dully in his chest. It was such an ordinary action, coming home late, quietly so as not to wake anyone, but something about her precise, furtive routine set off alarms honed by years of observation. Why the side door? Why exactly the same time every week? Her car had still been in the driveway when he got home. That meant if she'd gone somewhere, it wasn't by driving herself. The realization made his stomach lurch. Had someone picked her up nearby? Had she slipped out to meet someone who brought her back? The possibilities churned in his mind, each more distressing than the last. As he stood alone in the dark hallway, Brennan's mind churned over the past few weeks. In hindsight, the warning signs had been there. The new perfume Hannah only seemed to wear on Wednesdays. The way she guarded her phone lately, never leaving it face up on the table. The nights she came home smelling vaguely of whiskey when she'd claimed to be at a dry business meeting. Individually, he might have brushed these off as quirks or work stress. But now, each detail felt like another puzzle piece snapping into place, forming a picture he wished he didn't recognize. Brennan stayed frozen in place until he heard the distant creak of the bedroom door closing upstairs. Only then did he exhale the breath he'd been holding. His hands were trembling, an icy mix of dread and anger coursing through him. He had his first clue. Now he needed proof. Brennan eventually slipped into bed beside Hannah that night without waking her. But sleep refused to come. Lying in the darkness, he listened to the soft rhythm of her breathing and wondered what secrets might lie behind her serene fey aid. It was the first of many nights he would spend like this. Eyes open, heart pounding quietly in his chest, as far from peace as he'd ever been. The next morning, Brennan pretended nothing was amiss. Over breakfast, Hannah was chatty, if a bit tired around the eyes, and quick with a warm smile as she packed lunch for their 7-year-old son, Ethan. Brennan sipped his coffee and studied her covertly. She carried on about a new project at her law firm, carefully avoiding his gaze whenever he murmured a response. When she kissed Ethan goodbye and headed off to work in her sleek sedan, Brennan remained at the table, turning the events of the previous night over and over in his mind. If Hannah was stepping out on him, she was doing it with an accountant's precision, meticulously timed and deliberately concealed. Brennan's jaw tightened. Whatever was happening, he resolved to handle it the way he would handle an investigation, methodically, discreetly, and with unyielding determination. Gathering proof, quietly true to his training, Brennan didn't confront Hannah immediately. Instead, he spent the next 3 weeks quietly compiling evidence with the same meticulous care he once devoted to logging footprints at a crime scene. Each Wednesday came and went with Hannah repeating her ghost-like late-night arrivals, and each clue Brennan gathered only steeled his resolve further. It was a strange sort of double life. By day, Brennan was the polite husband and dutiful father, hiding his simmering anger behind routine conversations and half-hearted smiles. By night, he transformed into an investigator stalking his own wife's secrets. More than once, he lay awake in the early hours, staring at the ceiling beside a sleeping Hannah and wondering if he should just shake her awake and demand the truth. But each time, the thought of her lying to his face again, or denying everything despite the evidence, kept him silent. So he swallowed his hurt and continued the charade a little longer, gathering facts by night and playing the unassuming spouse by day. During the second week of surveillance, Brennan turned his attention to Hannah's financial trail. One afternoon, while Hannah was at work, he rifled through the home office filing cabinet and found what he needed: 2 months' worth of her corporate credit card statements. Settling into his desk chair, he ran a finger down the itemized lines until a particular merchant name began appearing over and over: the Lantern. It was a stylish whiskey bar in Cleveland's Warehouse District, a place Hannah had once claimed never to frequent. Yet here it was on her statements a dozen times, often with charges time-stamped at 9 or 10 p.m. on Wednesdays. Brennan's jaw tightened as he recalled Hannah scoffing at the idea of whiskey bars. She'd always insisted such outings weren't her scene. Clearly, they had become her scene with someone. He fetched his personal planner from a drawer and cross-referenced each date of those charges with their family calendar. Every single charge aligned with a night Hannah had told him she was working late or out for a team dinner. One date in particular made Brennan's grip on the papers tremble. It was the night of Ethan's school pageant, an evening Hannah had missed, claiming a client meeting had run long. Brennan remembered sitting in the auditorium with Ethan nervously fidgeting by his side, an empty seat next to them. He remembered the hurt in his son's eyes when Hannah never showed. Now he knew where she had been, sharing drinks at the Lantern while her family waited in vain. The betrayal cut deep. Brennan swallowed against a surge of anger and forced himself to remain analytical. He also noted with grim relief that he didn't see any charges for hotels or suspicious gifts on her bills. Perhaps a small mercy, or simply evidence that Hannah and Daniel confined their affair to those whiskey-fueled nights and the privacy of Daniel's world. He highlighted each Lantern visit on the statements and made copies for his records. These pieces of paper, small and nondescript, were proof that Hannah's double life had tangible traces. Still, printed statements weren't enough for Brennan. He wanted to see the place with his own eyes. The next night, he decided to pay a quiet visit to the Lantern. It was a sleek, upscale bar with low amber lighting and polished mahogany surfaces. Brennan slipped onto a stool in the early evening, blending with the after-work crowd in his blazer and open-collared shirt, and ordered a bourbon neat. As he sipped the smoky liquor, he glanced around the room. Was this where Hannah and Daniel sat close together in a corner booth, whispering over drinks while he was at home reading Ethan a bedtime story? The thought made his grip tighten around the glass. In the mirror behind the bar, he watched a laughing couple cozied up in a booth by the far wall. For an irrational moment, Brennan's vision blurred, and he imagined it was Hannah, tilting her head toward Daniel in intimate conversation. He blinked the illusion away and took another slow sip to steady himself. When the bartender came by again, Brennan cleared his throat and nodded toward the back booths. "Busy place for a weeknight," he said lightly. The bartender, a genial man with rolled-up shirt sleeves, chuckled. "Wednesdays get a decent crowd. We have our regulars." "Nice spot," Brennan lied, projecting a friendly ease. "First time here." "Actually," He pulled out his phone as if checking a message. I'm supposed to meet a colleague. You seen this woman around? He showed the bartender a photo of Hannah on his screen, a professional headshot cropped from her firm's website. His pulse thumped in his ears as he awaited the answer. The bartender glanced at the photo, then gave a slight grin of recognition. Oh, sure. She comes in sometimes. Brennan's stomach clenched. Usually alone or? Usually with a fella, the bartender said, wiping down the counter. Tall guy with a movie star kind of vibe. They're hard not to notice. They always look like they're having a real good time. He winked, oblivious to the turmoil he'd just unleashed. Brennan mustered a bland smile, as if this was mere idle curiosity. Good to know. I must be early then. Maybe so. Haven't seen her yet tonight, the bartender replied, wandering off to tend another patron. Brennan stared into his bourbon, working to keep his expression neutral. Movie star vibe. That had to be Daniel with his suave on-air charm. Having a real good time. The bartender's innocent words burned like acid. Brennan could picture Hannah perched on a stool right here, her face alight and animated in a way he hadn't seen in years, leaning into Daniel's shoulder as he whispered something that made her laugh. He paid his tab and left a generous tip before stepping out into the cool night. The city lights of downtown Cleveland blurred red and white in the drizzle as he walked to his car. He had sought confirmation of what he already suspected, and now he had it in spades. Each new discovery was another nail in the coffin of his marriage, and another weapon in the arsenal he was building for what came next. Parking lot logs. Next, Brennan turned his attention to Daniel Travers, the man he suspected was Hannah's secret lover. Travers hosted a popular late-night talk show on WCLR, Cleveland's local radio station. Brennan guessed that on the nights Hannah slipped away, she might have been meeting Daniel at or after his broadcasts. To confirm it, Brennan devised a ruse. On Friday morning of the third week, with a steady voice honed from years of interrogation, he phoned the WCLR building's parking garage office, introducing himself as a representative from a downtown restaurant's lost and found. He spun a polite, convincing story to the garage attendant on duty. We found a purse at our restaurant, Brennan explained, pitching his tone somewhere between apologetic and hopeful. There was a valet ticket from your garage inside, number 047, dated this Wednesday around 10:45 p.m. We're trying to return the purse to its owner. Could you help me identify which car that ticket was for? On the other end of the line, keys clacked as the attendant looked up the log. Let's see. Ticket 047 issued at 10:45 p.m., Wednesday, the man muttered to himself. Brennan heard the rustle of papers, then a satisfied, got it. That was a black Lexus SUV, license plate HMH 3271. Brennan closed his eyes briefly. That was Hannah's personal car. Yes, that sounds like it, he said evenly, one hand gripping the edge of his desk. Can you tell me what time that car left the garage? Sure, one sec. It was checked out at 1:12 a.m. Thursday morning. Brennan's pen pressed so hard against his notepad, it nearly tore through. He jotted the times, 10:45 p.m. in, 1:12 a.m. out, even though he knew he'd never forget them. Thank you, he said, his voice betraying none of the anger coursing through him. You've been very helpful. He hung up and sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the notes in front of him. Now he knew that on at least one of those work nights, Hannah had parked at Daniel's workplace and stayed until well past midnight. The likely scenario was obvious and gutting. She would meet him after his show, leave her car behind, go somewhere with him for a few hours, then return to retrieve her Lexus after 1 a.m. Brennan rubbed a hand over his mouth, a gesture of restraint rather than surprise. The puzzle pieces were all aligning. He had video of Hannah sneaking in late, financial proof of her outings with Daniel, eyewitness confirmation from the bartender, and now a record tying her car to Daniel's location during those absences. Caught in the act. For the final piece of proof, Brennan decided to obtain photographic evidence. Words and numbers on paper were damning, but a picture would be undeniable. The following Wednesday, he executed a carefully laid plan. He told Hannah he had a networking event that night and might be home late. In truth, he stationed himself downtown near the WCLR studio well before 10 p.m., armed with a refurbished digital camera that boasted a decent zoom and excellent low-light capability. He found a cluster of decorative planters across the street from the station's employee entrance, enough cover to keep him concealed, but with a clear line of sight to the door beneath its fluorescent security light. The city had quieted down by that late hour. Distant traffic hummed along the avenues, and a neon beer sign in a tavern window across the block flickered on the wet pavement. Brennan's breath fogged in the chilly autumn air as he waited, every nerve on edge. He ran through contingency plans in his mind. What he'd do if Hannah and Daniel never emerged, or if a security guard approached him. But he doubted anyone would spot him hunched in the shadows. If the pattern held, they would appear soon, and they wouldn't be looking for a watcher in the dark. A little after 11 p.m., the side door of the building finally swung open and two familiar figures stepped out. Even from a distance, Brennan recognized Hannah's graceful stride and Daniel Travers' tall, confident posture, his overcoat flung stylishly over one shoulder. Brennan's heart lurched into his throat at the sight of them together. Hannah was walking close at Daniel's side, her arm looped casually through his and her body leaning into him. She was laughing at something, Daniel said, her face lit up and clearly happy. Pressing himself flatter against the concrete planter, Brennan raised the camera and began snapping pictures in rapid succession without flash. Through the viewfinder, he captured Daniel's handsome profile as he jingled a set of keys, and Hannah gazing up at him with an expression of affection that pierced Brennan to his core. She had let her usually neat hair down in loose waves and wore the plum-colored peacoat she typically reserved for special occasions. Details she hadn't bothered with in months when they went out as a family. As Daniel unlocked a sleek silver BMW parked at the curb, Hannah rested a hand lightly on his back, a brief, intimate gesture that spoke volumes. Daniel opened the passenger door of his car, and Hannah slipped inside, casting a quick glance over her shoulder, a reflex to check if anyone was watching. Brennan held his breath and remained absolutely still behind the planters, finger clicking the shutter repeatedly. In that moment, through the lens, his wife looked like a stranger, a woman stepping into a lover's car under the cloak of night, a woman who had mastered deception in plain sight of everyone who loved her. Once Daniel rounded the hood and got into the driver's seat, the BMW's headlights ignited, and the car pulled into the street. Brennan ducked lower as the vehicle passed mere yards from his hiding spot. Only when the red taillights vanished around a corner did he dare to breathe again. His hands trembled slightly as he reviewed the shots on the camera's preview screen. They weren't perfect, grainy and a touch out of focus, but one photo stood out. In it, Hannah clung to Daniel's arm, her face clearly visible and glowing with a blissful smile as they moved toward his car. Brennan lowered the camera, a mix of triumph and devastation flooding through him. This was it. Hard proof. By the time he returned home that night, it was nearly 2 a.m. Hannah was back as well, fast asleep in their bed, likely thinking her secrets were safe. Moving like a ghost through the house, Brennan went into his home office. He transferred the digital photos onto his computer and printed the clearest one on glossy paper. The printer's hum filled the otherwise silent room. When it was done, he held the fresh print under the desk lamp, staring at the damning image of his wife wrapped around another man. Unbidden, memories of better times flickered through Brennan's mind. He could almost hear the echo of her laughter on their honeymoon, feel the warmth of her hand in his when they signed Ethan's birth certificate together. He pictured Hannah on their wedding day a decade ago, radiant in white as they spun in their first dance. He remembered her tears of joy when she cradled newborn Ethan against her chest at the hospital and whispered, "We made a family." Those moments now felt like artifacts from another life, fragments of a story that had somehow gone terribly wrong. The woman in the photograph before him, sneaking off into the night with another man, was a stranger, a far cry from the faithful partner he'd once believed her to be. It felt like a stab to the heart, but also a grim vindication of his instincts. Brennan slid the photo into a manila envelope, along with printouts of the credit card records, the valet's log note, and a USB drive containing the hallway camera footage. He tied the envelope string tightly and placed it in a small wall safe hidden behind a bookshelf. These were the facts, the truth of what Hannah had done, all neatly compiled and secure under lock and key. Before leaving his office, Brennan stepped across the hall to gently push open Ethan's bedroom door. The nightlight cast a soft blue glow over the room. He could make out his son's small form curled up under the covers, one arm wrapped around a threadbare stuffed dinosaur. Ethan was sleeping soundly, his face peaceful and innocent, blissfully unaware of the storm that was gathering in his family. Brennan felt a tightness in his throat as he watched the child breathe in and out, each soft exhale a reminder of what truly mattered. He tiptoed to the bedside and brushed a light kiss on Ethan's warm forehead, careful not to wake him. In that moment, looking at his sleeping son, Brennan's resolve solidified into steel. He would not allow Ethan to become collateral damage of Hannah's choices. Whatever he did next, he would do it to protect this little boy's world. At last, Brennan returned to his desk chair and sat heavily, exhaustion and adrenaline catching up to him all at once. He had all the evidence he needed to confront Hannah and Daniel, evidence that would shatter their lies and leave no room for denial. There were moments when Brennan's anger nearly drove him to abandon the slow approach. More than once, he fantasized about confronting Daniel face to face, storming into the radio studio during a live broadcast, or appearing on Daniel's doorstep to land a well-deserved punch. He imagined exposing Hannah's infidelity in a blaze of public humiliation, perhaps sending copies of that incriminating photo to all their friends and to her firm's partners in one vindictive sweep. But each time those impulses flared, he extinguished them. That wasn't justice, it was chaos. Brennan hadn't devoted his life to law and order just to become part of the madness. If he was going to set things right, he would do it with precision and control, not blind rage. He had gathered the proof. Soon, it would be time to act. The stakes are raised. Hannah sensed something was off before Brennan made his move. Despite his careful facade of normalcy, subtle changes in his demeanor did not escape her notice. A little less affection, a few more late work nights of his own. It was enough to make her uneasy. The confrontation came one Thursday evening about a month into Brennan's quiet investigation. They were alone in the kitchen after dinner. Ethan had been put to bed, and the house was still. Brennan stood at the sink washing the last of the dishes, while Hannah dried a plate with a dish towel. She had been unusually quiet all through their meal, stealing quick glances at Brennan when she thought he wasn't looking. Brennan could feel tension radiating off her as tangibly as heat from an oven. Finally, Hannah broke the silence. "Is there something you want to ask me?" she said abruptly. Her voice was tight, and she set the dried plate down with a muted clink. Brennan shut off the tap and slowly turned, wiping his hands on a dishcloth, his eyes fixed on her. "What do you mean?" Hannah crossed her arms, the dish towel balled in one fist. "You've been different lately," she said warily. "Distant. I feel like you're watching me, waiting for something." Her attempt at casual accusation fell flat. Her voice quivered ever so slightly. A heavy beat passed. Brennan could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator and the drip of the faucet into the sink. He leveled his gaze at her, considering his words. He could confront her right now, slam down the evidence, and demand an explanation. But he didn't. Instead, he replied in a low, measured tone. "I notice patterns. I keep notes." Hannah's eyes widened. She hadn't expected that answer. A flush crept up her neck. "Excuse me?" Brennan placed the damp dishcloth on the counter. "You heard me," he said quietly, holding her gaze. His face was unreadable, but there was an unmistakable weight to his words. For a moment, Hannah simply stared at him. In her eyes, Brennan saw a flash of panic before she quickly blinked it away. Her knuckles were white around the crumpled towel. It looked as if she might blurt out a denial or an accusation of her own, but she bit it back. Instead, she uncrossed her arms and cleared her throat. "Fine," she mumbled, turning away. "Keep your notes, then." She tossed the dish towel onto the counter and left the kitchen without another word. Brennan listened to the echo of her footsteps retreating down the hallway and up the stairs. A door closed, firmly, but not quite a slam. Then silence. Brennan remained where he was, leaning against the sink, his heart pounding in his ears. In that brief exchange, so much had been said without either of them explicitly naming the truth. Hannah had effectively admitted her guilt through omission. She hadn't denied anything, hadn't even demanded an explanation. And Brennan had as good as told her that he knew. It was a small skirmish in what was about to become an all-out war. He exhaled slowly, alone in the dim kitchen. He felt no triumph, only a grim resolve. Hannah's reaction confirmed it. She knew the walls were closing in. Perhaps, he thought, she would try to cover her tracks more carefully now. Perhaps she would even try to end the affair in a panic. It didn't matter. He already had everything needed to destroy the comfortable little world she'd built on deceit. Over the next few days, Brennan mapped out the final phase of his retribution with methodical care. If he was going to dismantle the illicit world Hannah and Daniel had built, he would strike them in every place they felt secure. For Daniel, that meant his public persona and career. For Hannah, her professional standing and financial comfort. And finally, the bond they both took for granted. Their access to the child whose home they had imperiled with lies. It was a cold strategy, bordering on ruthless, but Brennan felt a steely clarity as he set it into motion. The time for patience was nearing its end. The time for consequences was about to begin. Reputation. Undone. The following week, Brennan initiated the first strike of his plan. Early Monday morning, while Hannah left for her office looking bleary-eyed and anxious, Brennan prepared an envelope addressed to WCLR's general manager. Inside, he carefully arranged copies of the evidence that would hit Daniel Travers where it hurt most, his credibility. There was the Valley log extract showing Hannah's car in the station garage past midnight, the highlighted bar receipts from the lantern, and the crown jewel. That glossy photograph of Hannah and Daniel arm in arm on a late night. Brennan added a brief, typed cover note with no signature, only a single damning suggestion. You might want to verify your star's late-night commitments before booking him on prime time. He sealed the manila envelope, leaving no return address, and before dawn he drove across town to the WCLR station offices on Euclid Avenue. With a baseball cap pulled low on his brow, he slipped the envelope through the mail slot in the front door. The sun was just beginning to rise, staining the cloudy sky a dull pink as Brennan walked back to his car. He felt a grim satisfaction settle in his chest. The first domino was in position, ready to fall. Through the grapevine, Brennan learned that WCLR's general manager confronted Daniel Travers that very morning with the contents of the anonymous package. Daniel had reportedly gone pale and sputtered indignantly that it was all a misunderstanding, until the photograph was produced. At that point, the silver-tongued radio host fell into telling silence. Within an hour, security guards escorted Daniel out of the station in disgrace. The mighty voice of late-night Cleveland radio was left utterly speechless when faced with proof of his own transgressions. Brennan allowed himself a tight, private smile when he heard. It appeared station management had already acted on the tip. That evening, when Daniel's show normally would have aired, WCLR ran a pre-recorded program in his place. Daniel Travers's desk phone went unanswered. On social media, the station vaguely announced he was on leave pending an internal review. The city's airwaves went strangely quiet without Daniel's trademark banter, and in offices and homes around Cleveland, listeners wondered what had become of their charismatic host. Brennan didn't wonder. He knew, and he had more moves to make. Financial leverage. That same day, mere hours after Daniel's career began imploding, Brennan confronted Hannah with the next blow. Around mid-afternoon, he texted her to come home early, saying only that they needed to talk. Now, as the waning light of Monday filtered through the dining room windows, they sat opposite each other at the table where they had shared so many family meals. Between them lay a folder of documents that Brennan had placed with almost military precision. Hannah arrived looking apprehensive, and now she stared at the folder as if it were a coiled snake. "What is this about?" she asked, her voice attempting firmness but failing. Brennan clasped his hands atop the folder. He kept his tone calm. "Go ahead, open it." With a faltering breath, Hannah flipped open the cover. The first page was a printout of her latest corporate credit card statement, several lines highlighted in yellow. Brennan saw her eyes scan the page and knew the instant she spotted those familiar charges. "The lantern?" she said, voice barely above a whisper. I've never been—" "Don't." Brennan cut her off softly, but with steel underneath. "Don't insult me by lying, Hannah." Her mouth snapped shut. 2 red spots bloomed on her cheeks. Brennan pulled out a second page, the next month's statement, also littered with the lantern charges, and laid it on top of the first. "Over 2 months you managed to dine at the Lantern a dozen times," he said evenly. "Each time coded on your expense reports as client entertainment." He tapped one highlighted line after another. "I doubt your firm's partners would be pleased to learn these weren't business dinners at all." Hannah's eyes darted over the evidence. She was breathing fast. "You went through my statements," she murmured, half accusation, half disbelief. "I did." Brennan leaned forward. "And I've already shared copies with your firm's HR department." Hannah's head snapped up, her eyes wild. "You... what?" "I emailed them this morning," he lied. In truth, it had been late last night. "Anonymously, of course. I thought they should be aware that a senior associate has been getting reimbursement for personal rendezvous at a whiskey bar." He almost spat the last words. Hannah's face drained of all color. "Oh my God," she breathed. Her hand twitched toward the documents but then froze, as if afraid touching them would burn her. They'll think I was misusing funds. I could be fired, Brennan. At the very least, you'll be asked to pay back every cent." His voice remained level, pitiless. "What is that? Maybe $20,000, $30,000 over the last year? And I wouldn't hold my breath about that promotion to partner. Fraud tends to complicate career advancement." "You're trying to ruin me," Hannah choked out. Her eyes brimmed with tears she refused to let fall. There was anger in her tone, but beneath it, raw panic. Brennan felt an unwanted pang of emotion, memories of the ambitious, bright-eyed law student Hannah used to be. But he steeled himself. "No, Hannah, you did this. I'm merely ensuring the truth comes to light." Hannah's devastation suddenly flared into fury. "I'll fight this!" She spat through her tears, crumpling one of the statements in her fist. "I'll get a lawyer. You won't get away with taking my job." "Go ahead and try," Brennan said with quiet menace, cutting her off. He met her glare with an icy stare of his own. "By the time a tribunal hears the full story, imagine what will be laid out for everyone to see. The late nights, the lies, the misuse of company money. If you want all that on the record, be my guest." Hannah's lip quivered. She opened her mouth, then closed it, uncertain. Brennan stood, gathering the papers back into the folder. As he did, a single tear escaped her and rolled down her cheek. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, voice breaking. "I know I hurt you, but this will ruin me." For a heartbeat, Brennan's resolve wavered as a wave of hurt washed over him. But then he remembered Hannah stumbling in at 11:07 every Wednesday, remembered Ethan scanning the audience for a mother who'd never arrive, remembered the photo of her beaming at another man. He hardened his heart. "All I'm doing," he said, "is holding you accountable." With that, he closed the folder and stood. "You might want to start preparing an explanation for your bosses. I'm sure they'll want one." Hannah's shoulders sagged. She looked down at her hands, the fight gone out of her, replaced by despair. As Brennan left the dining room, she whispered something that sounded like his name mixed with a sob, but he didn't stop. He climbed the stairs without looking back. In the hallway, just out of Hannah's sight, Brennan paused. His hands were shaking from the encounter. He took a long, steadying breath. 2 strikes down. 1 more to go. As he walked away, Brennan had a cold realization. Hannah was now utterly isolated. Daniel Travers would be too busy scrambling to save his own skin to support her. Men like him were quick to vanish when trouble came. In all likelihood, Daniel had already begun slipping out of her life now that their secret was exposed. Hannah had lost her illicit partner, her professional veneer was cracking, and what was coming next would take even more from her. Legal and custody control. That evening, Brennan took the final step to secure the upper hand. He met with an old friend from his police days, Detective Carla Ruiz, who now worked part-time as a family court investigator. They convened in a near-empty all-night diner on the outskirts of the city. The diner was one of those fluorescent-lit haunts that hadn't changed since the 1970s. Faded red vinyl booths, a scratched-up jukebox in the corner, and the smell of coffee and frying onions thick in the air. A lone waitress leaned on the counter, and a trucker in a baseball cap stirred soup at a table by the window. In the privacy of a corner booth, over 2 cups of stale coffee, Brennan quietly laid out his situation. Carla listened intently, her fingers drumming lightly on her mug as Brennan recounted Hannah's repeated absences and the evidence of the affair. Her brows knitted in concern. "You've got solid proof of her being out of pocket late at night," she said. "But we have to tie it to impact on Ethan if we want this to fly in family court." Brennan nodded. "I was thinking the same. She's been neglecting her evenings with him, I can document that. And I have the footage of her coming home well after his bedtime on school nights." Carla stirred a packet of sugar into her coffee thoughtfully. The overhead neon light reflected off the tired Formica tabletop. "If you present it right, a judge could see this as a pattern of irresponsible parenting," she said, "especially with a 7-year-old. Judges don't like anything that disrupts a child's routine or well-being." She paused, then fixed Brennan with a gentle but firm look. "Brennan, are you sure you want to go this far? Once we pull this trigger, it's going to get ugly. This isn't just gathering evidence anymore. It's war." Brennan stared at the steam rising from his cup. War. The word felt apartment. He pictured Ethan's face, confused and hurt on those nights his mother was absent, and Hannah's carefree smile in that photograph. "She crossed lines that can't be uncrossed," he replied quietly. "I'm just making sure there are consequences. This needs to be done." Carla nodded slowly. "All right, I'll help you. Just watch your back, okay? People get unpredictable when they're cornered." Brennan managed a faint, appreciative smile. "I can handle Hannah. I know all her moves now." They spent the next hour working out the details. Carla would file an ex parte emergency motion for temporary custody first thing in the morning, attaching an affidavit summarizing Hannah's late-night absences and their potential harm to Ethan. Brennan would provide a written statement and any supporting evidence, but he wouldn't even have to appear in court unless the judge required it. With Carla's standing and a cooperative judge, they could have an order within days. A week later, Brennan found himself on a wooden bench outside the family court judge's chambers. His foot tapped anxiously on the marble floor as he waited for Carla to emerge. The hallway was quiet, save for the distant echo of a gavel and the muffled voices of clerks behind heavy oak doors. At last, Carla stepped out, a folder in hand and a subtle nod on her face. She walked over and discreetly handed Brennan a stamped document. "It's done," she said under her breath, a small, triumphant smile tugging at her lips. On the top page, he read the words, "Temporary custody order" beneath the case number. A mixture of triumph and sadness washed over him as he absorbed the meaning. He exhaled and murmured, "Thank you, Carla." "Take care of yourself," she replied, squeezing his shoulder before heading down the hall. Brennan remained seated a moment longer on that bench, the weight of the signed order heavy in his hands. This victory in court felt somber, but it was necessary. The order cited concerns about the mother's frequent absences during the child's routine evening hours and granted Brennan temporary sole physical custody of Ethan. It declared that until further review, Hannah would have restricted visitation. Specifically, she was permitted to see Ethan only on weekends, supervised by a third party. Her sister, as Brennan had subtly recommended, knowing Hannah would be too ashamed to misbehave under her own sister's watch. That evening, Hannah came home to find a uniformed process server waiting on their doorstep with the court papers. Brennan stood in the living room, watching through the front window as Hannah accepted the envelope, already looking defeated as she likely guessed its contents. A minute later, she burst through the door, eyes red and furious, clutching the custody order in a shaking hand. "How could you?" she shouted, voice cracking with a mix of anger and anguish. "You told the court I'm an unfit mother? That I'm endangering Ethan? Are you out of your mind, Brennan?" Brennan stood his ground in the center of the living room, arms loosely at his sides. "The court made a decision in Ethan's best interest," he replied evenly. Hannah was beyond reasoning. She waved the document frantically. "This is lies," she spat. "You know I never put him in danger. This says I can only see my own son under supervision. What kind of—" Her voice broke into a sob. "He's my baby," she whimpered. "You can't do this." Brennan's face was impassive, but his heart pounded painfully at the sight of Hannah collapsing into tears. "I've already done it," he said quietly. "It's done." Hannah's devastation flared into anger again. She glared at him through tears. "I'll fight this in court," she snarled. I'll get a lawyer and have this overturned by next week." Brennan tilted his head, eyes cold. "You can certainly try. But consider what that fight would look like. You'd have to explain to a judge why you were sneaking out every week at Ethan's bedtime. Why you left him time and again." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Imagine the evidence laid out for everyone. The photos, the credit card records, the fact that you were with Daniel instead of home with your son. If you want that on the record, Hannah, be my guest." That stopped her. Hannah swayed slightly where she stood, as if the energy had drained out of her. The papers slid from her fingers to the floor. "Please," she suddenly sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "Not our son. Brennan, don't take our son from me. I'll do anything." She crumpled onto the couch, shoulders shaking. It was a sight Brennan never expected to see. Hannah, proud and composed Hannah, utterly broken. He felt a sting of pain and almost reached out on reflex to comfort her, but he stopped himself. There was no comforting to be done. This was consequence. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but firm. "Ethan will stay with me. He'll be safe and cared for. You can see him on Saturdays at your sister's house. I won't stop you from loving him, Hannah, but I won't let you hurt him with your choices either." Hannah's sobs grew softer as she ran out of tears. Finally, she wiped her face with a trembling hand, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, and looked up at him. There was a hollow sorrow in her gaze, mixed with a desperate kind of gratitude that he hadn't barred her from seeing Ethan entirely. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Only silence hung between them. Silence and the irrevocable fact that their lives had been irreparably shattered. Hannah's first, last, and only attempt to resist had crumbled. There was nothing left for her to do but accept the terms or risk even greater ruin. The final judgment. 1 week later, on a cool Sunday evening, roughly a month after Brennan first placed that tiny motion sensor in their hallway, he called Hannah into the living room after Ethan was asleep. The curtains were drawn, and only a single lamp cast a weak amber glow, stretching their shadows long across the rug. The house was dim and silent. Hannah entered the room like a ghost, arms wrapped around herself. She sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, her eyes red-rimmed and downcast. The events of the past weeks had clearly taken their toll. Her face was drawn, and she looked as if she hadn't slept in days. Brennan stood over the coffee table, a manila envelope in hand, the same one he had methodically filled with evidence. He placed it on the table between them. Hannah flinched at the sight of it, her breath hitching. Slowly, Brennan untied the string and slid out a single glossy photograph, laying it gently on the table's surface. It was the picture of Hannah and Daniel outside the studio, the incriminating moment frozen in time. Hannah's lips parted in a sharp inhale as she recognized it. Tears immediately welled in her eyes. Brennan then produced a blank sheet of paper and a pen, setting them atop the photo. He stood over the table, looking down at his wife, this woman he had known so well, and now not at all. "Choose your next move," he said quietly. Hannah's eyes flicked up to meet his. In the dim light, they shone with tears. "Brennan," she whispered, voice raw. Brennan felt a surge of conflicting emotions seeing her like this. Remorseful, broken, a far cry from the confident person she had been. But he kept his face hard. He had to. He acknowledged inwardly that this was blackmail, a ruthless gambit he never imagined he would use, especially not on his own wife. But in the aftermath of all she'd done, his conscience was quiet. If this was what it took to ensure consequences and to protect their son's future, so be it. Hannah reached out a trembling hand and touched the blank paper with her fingertips. "What? What is this?" she asked, though she already knew. Brennan's tone remained soft but implacable. "It's an agreement. I've already drafted most of it. It says you forfeit your claim to the house and our joint assets. It says that you won't contest the custody arrangement I put in place. And it includes a clause that this—" He nodded at the photograph. "And all other evidence remain private. No court filings, no public record. We end this quietly." A tear rolled down Hannah's cheek. "And if I refuse?" Brennan's eyes flashed. "If you refuse, then everyone finds out. Our friends, your colleagues, the moms at school. Everyone. The choice is yours." Hannah closed her eyes, and for a long moment, the only sound was the wind brushing against the window panes outside. When she opened them again, resignation had settled there. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" she said, a note of bitter admiration in her tone. Brennan didn't respond. He simply pushed the pen a little closer toward her. Hannah swallowed hard. She picked up the pen. Her hand hovered over the blank line on the paper as she gave one last pleading look. "Brennan, I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I never meant for any of this. To hurt you. Or Ethan." Brennan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. There was nothing left to say. With shaking hands, Hannah bent over the paper and signed her name in a looping script. Each pen stroke seemed to take an enormous effort, but eventually her name stood stark on the page. She set the pen down, her shoulders collapsing inward as if a weight had landed on her. "It's done," she whispered. Brennan picked up the agreement and the photograph, sliding both back into the envelope. He glanced at Hannah. Her face was ashen, her eyes hollow. In that instant, he felt a pang of something. Grief, pity, love long lost. But he buried it. He gave a curt nod. "Yes, it's done." Hannah wrapped her arms around herself, bowing her head. A muffled sob escaped her. Brennan stood there a moment longer, looming over the wreckage of the woman he once loved, and felt only a cold emptiness. He turned and walked out, leaving her sitting in a pool of lamplight with her sorrow. Only when he was entirely alone did Brennan finally allow the mask to slip. Retreating to the silent refuge of his home office, he closed the door and sank into his chair. A violent tremor passed through him as a wave of emotion crashed over every wall he'd built to contain it. Anger, grief, betrayal, emotions he had dammed up behind duty and determination, now broke free in the form of hot tears that blurred his vision. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes, suppressing any sound. He didn't sob. It was more a series of ragged, silent breaths as months of tension and hurt released from his body. He wasn't sure how long he sat hunched over his desk in the dark, tears drying on his cheeks. At some point, the storm within him subsided to a dull ache, and a kind of numb calm settled in. What was done was done. He had delivered the reckoning he believed Hannah and Daniel deserved, but it had come at a heavy cost. After regaining his composure, Brennan rose and, true to his word, locked the envelope, evidence, agreement, and all, into his safe. The justice he sought was complete, delivered without fanfare, as precise and final as a judge's gavel. Sometimes the memories still ached, a phantom pain of what he'd lost. But Brennan had walked through fire and come out the other side, tempered, if not unscathed. In the grand scheme of things, he told himself, that was the most anyone could ask for. Epilogue. 2 years later, the echoes of those tumultuous days had faded, but their consequences still quietly shaped the lives involved. Brennan sold the old townhouse where so many memories, both joyous and painful, had been made. It was too large for the simpler life he wanted, and too full of ghosts. He moved with Ethan to a modest condominium on the other side of the city, closer to a community youth center. There, he volunteered as a youth diversion coach, running a weekly boxing program and mentoring teenagers who had gotten into minor scrapes with the law. Guiding those kids away from bad decisions gave him a sense of purpose, and in a way, helped him come to terms with his own turbulent choices during the divorce. It was fulfilling work that made use of his investigative skills and let him channel his energy into something good. He poured his energy into raising Ethan, who was now 9 years old and thriving. It hadn't been easy at first. Ethan had asked tough questions about why Mommy wasn't home every day. Questions Brennan answered as gently and truthfully as he could. But with time, the boy adjusted to the new routine. He excelled in school and relished the extra time with his father, their bond only growing stronger after the tumult. Brennan remained single, not yet ready to open his heart again. The wounds Hannah left had largely healed, but the scars made him cautious. Instead, he found contentment in being a devoted father and a mentor to the kids at the center. For now, that was enough. Hannah, for her part, remarried quietly a year after the divorce was finalized, her new husband never knowing about those Wednesday nights. Her professional reputation at the firm, however, never recovered from the expense scandal. She remained at her law firm for a time, dutifully paying back the funds she had misused and keeping her head down. The coveted promotion to partner never materialized. Eventually, she accepted a position at a smaller firm in a neighboring city, an attempt at a fresh start away from Cleveland's whispers. We spoke only when necessary, exchanging brief, civil words about Ethan's weekend handoffs. In those rare moments, I sometimes caught a look in her eyes, a glimmer of remorse and the understanding that the life she had dismantled could never be rebuilt. As for Daniel Travers, the charismatic voice that once rode Cleveland's late-night airwaves, he never returned to radio. The unofficial story around WCLR was that his contract was terminated quietly after the review. He drifted into obscurity, attempting to host a small podcast from his hometown. His name rarely came up in conversation anymore. On the rare occasion Brennan heard someone mention Daniel, it was only as a footnote. Whatever happened to that radio guy? People would ask idly, before moving on to more interesting topics. Cleveland had moved on, and so had Brennan. Brennan never spoke to Daniel again. On one occasion, browsing in a grocery store aisle, he spotted Daniel at the other end. The former radio host's eyes widened in recognition before he quickly turned and hurried away, ducking into a different aisle to avoid even a passing greeting. Daniel Travers, once so full of swagger behind a microphone, could not even meet the gaze of the man whose life he had helped shatter. Late on certain evenings, after Ethan was tucked in, Brennan would sit by the window nursing a glass of bourbon. Sometimes he unlocked his safe and pulled out that lone photograph, the one he had kept as a reminder. In the grainy image under the glow of a streetlight, Hannah clung to Daniel's arm, both of them smiling as though without a care in the world. Brennan never showed this photo to another soul. It remained locked away except for those private moments. He would stare at it and feel no triumph, no gloating, only a solemn sense of justice served. In a world of whispers and secrets, Brennan had been the one man who refused to look away. And in doing so, he had delivered a justice as precise and unforgiving as any verdict he'd ever secured in a courtroom. Then Brennan would return the photo to its place in the safe, turn the key, and take a final slow sip of his bourbon. He would gaze out at the quiet city lights of Cleveland and let the stillness of the night seep in. The ordeal was over. The wounds had scarred over. What had been broken was not restored. Some things can never be, but a measure of balance had been regained. It was a hard-won peace, etched with sorrow and tempered by loss. A bittersweet justice, but justice all the same.